So thinking about working or studying abroad in 2025, well, buckle up because some pretty big visa changes are coming. We've got this awesome blog post all about it. It's got some great expert insights into what's going on.
Yeah, and it's interesting. Countries aren't really trying to make things harder for people. It's more about being strategic.
Right.
They want to make sure they're attracting people who are really committed to contributing and actually thriving there.
Makes sense. So that's what we're going to be talking about today. We're going to unpack those changes and figure out what they mean for you. Okay, so one thing that keeps popping up is this genuine student requirement. That sounds pretty intense.
It is. It's about stopping visa fraud and making sure applicants are really passionate about their studies. So, like, instead of just saying, I want to study, you'll need to show that you really get your chosen field,
Right.
like how it fits with your long-term goals.
What's that going to look like in practice? More paperwork?
Think think personal statements that go way beyond just surface level stuff. You'll need to like articulate your whole academic journey so far, explain how your studies connect to your career goals, and even show off your knowledge of the program and school you've chosen. You might even have to do an interview.
Whoa, an interview. That's serious. What kind of questions should people get ready for?
Well, imagine having to talk about a certain research paper that influenced your decision to study this, or explain how what you're going to learn will like fill a skill gap back in your home country. They want to see a real plan.
So it's not just about being excited. It's about having a clear plan. And speaking of planning, the blog post also mentions stricter financial requirements. Why is that?
Well, there are a bunch of reasons. Obviously, global inflation is a big one. Things cost more these days,
Oh,
right?
I
But it also goes deeper. Countries want to make sure students can actually afford to live there without like constantly struggling with money. So that means not just tuition, but also rent, food, healthcare, all those things.
So budgeting is going to be super important. What kind of documents will students need to show?
Bank statements for sure. They need to be detailed and show that you've got stable finances. And if you've got sponsors, their statements need to be super solid too. It's all about proving they can actually support you.
Oh, and remember, these requirements will probably be different depending on where you're going and what you're studying.
So it's not one size fits all. Got it. Okay, let's talk about English. It sounds like the bar is being raised there too.
For sure. You know, basic English might have been enough before, but now it's all about fluency.
Hmm.
They want to see that you can really thrive there, not just academically, but socially too.
So it's more than just being able to order a coffee.
Right. Think about like participating in a super complex debate in class or working on group projects with local students. They want to see that you can really engage.
Makes sense. So does this mean everyone's going to need to take those standardized tests like the IELTS or TOEFL? It might not be like mandatory for everyone, but I think we're going to see those tests being way more important. They give a really good measure of how good your English is. And it kind of makes things fair for people from different backgrounds.
So brushing up on your English is about way more than just passing a test. It's about succeeding in your studies and even after you graduate. But all this extra scrutiny,
Yeah.
these higher standards, makes you wonder if it's going to cost more.
Yeah, and unfortunately it will. We're expecting visa application fees to go up basically everywhere.
Oh, no, the fees. I guess it makes sense, though. I mean, think about all the extra work they'll have to do to process applications.
Exactly. More detailed applications, background checks, interviews, plus just the cost of running the system. Those fees are meant to help cover it all.
So another thing to budget for. Okay, but here's a bit of good news. A lot of countries are extending their post-study work visas. They're realizing how valuable international students are.
Yep. It's a great opportunity. So instead of having to leave right after you graduate, you might get to stay and work there, build up your experience and your network, maybe even start your career in that country.
So it's a chance to put all that hard work you did at school into practice, and maybe even stay there long term.
Exactly. And it benefits everyone. Graduates get a head start, and the countries get to keep those talented people.
If you're thinking about working abroad long term, those post-study work visas could be the way to go.
Yeah,
But I'm guessing the rules are different depending on where you go.
definitely. Some countries are more generous than others, and a lot of it comes down to what kind of jobs they need filled. So yeah, do your research. Figure out which countries offer the best opportunities for what you want to do.
Don't just chase the dream, chase the right dream. Okay, now for something a little different. What about regional and remote opportunities? The blog post talked about some cool incentives for going off the beaten path.
It's really interesting. A lot of countries are trying to deal with population imbalances and boost their economies in different areas. So they're encouraging people to consider those less populated regions.
So less competition, maybe more opportunities, and you get to experience a different side of the country.
Exactly. Everyone wins. Students and workers get a unique experience, the regions get an economic boost, and the country gets a more balanced population.
That's awesome. The blog post mentioned Australia specifically. What are they doing?
Oh, they're leading the way. Australia is offering a ton of benefits, lower visa fees, faster processing, even scholarships just for people going to regional areas. They really want people to go there.
So if you're up for an adventure and want to see something new, this could be a great option.
Totally agree. Think outside the box. Look beyond those big cities. There's a whole world out there.
Okay, so we've covered a lot. Genuine student intent, regional opportunities. But before we wrap up this part, there's one more thing. The crackdown on visa hopping.
Yeah.
What's that all about?
So visa hopping is basically when people keep switching from one visa to another without a real plan. It's a way to stay in a country longer. Like, they might go from a student visa to a tourist visa, then to a work visa. They're taking advantage of loopholes to stay there.
So countries are trying to make sure people are being honest and not just gaming the system.
Right. It's about keeping the whole visa process fair. Countries want people who are really going to contribute and become a part of things, not just people who want to hang out there for as long as possible.
So have a plan, be honest, and show that you're really committed to what you're doing.
Absolutely. A clear plan will definitely impress visa officers, and it'll help you make smarter decisions along the way, too.
All right, well, that's it for part one of our deep dive on these visa changes. We've learned a lot, but there's still more to explore. Stay tuned for part two, where we'll get into some country-specific changes, talk about work hour restrictions, and dive into those temporary graduate visa updates.
Welcome back. So we've been talking about all these big visa changes coming up, right? And like we said, having a clear plan and being genuine about what you want to do is super important. And that's going to be especially true when it comes to work hour limits for students.
Right, the blog post mentions some possible changes to those limits. That could be a big deal for students who need to work part-time to, make ends meet while they're studying abroad.
Yeah, totally. It's a tough balance, you know. Countries want to make sure students are really focused on their studies, but they also get that part-time work can be helpful, like getting experience and obviously for money.
So it's not just about making sure students aren't burning out. It's about making sure they can actually succeed in their programs.
Exactly. Think of it this way. Having stricter work hour limits actually helps you get the most out of your time at school. You'll have more time to focus on your classes, maybe do some research, and really get into the whole academic scene.
That's a good point. It's all about finding that balance. Enough work to pay the bills, but not so much that it messes up your studies. So speaking of planning ahead, what about temporary graduate visas? Any changes there?
Yep, definitely some things to keep in mind. The Temporary Graduate Visa, or TGV, is a really popular way for students to stay and work in a country after they graduate. But in 2025, things might get a bit more complicated.
So it might not be as easy to just graduate and then get a work visa?
Well, it's never that simple. But yeah, things could get more competitive. One change might be needing to show you can speak the language really well. And not just like academic English. They'll be looking for fluency in everyday conversations and all the specific words you need for your job. You know, all those little social and professional things.
So they're looking for graduates who are ready to go right, not just in the classroom, but in a real job too.
Exactly. They want people who can fit right into the workplace and contribute from day one. Oh, and another possible change is needing some local work experience that you got while you were a student.
So internships and part-time jobs are going to be even more important, not just for the skills, but to show that you're serious about building a career in that country.
Exactly. It's like building your resume while you're still in school. You get those valuable skills, but you also show that you can adapt and that you understand the culture. And employers love that stuff.
You're showing them that you're not just passing through, you're really invested in becoming a part of things. Okay, now let's talk about something a little bit tricky. Increased scrutiny on some student groups and education providers. Why is that happening?
Yeah, so it's important to be careful here. International education has gotten really popular, but that also means there's more fraud happening. Some people and even some schools are taking advantage of the system. And that's a problem for students who are doing things the right way.
So it's about protecting the whole system and making sure everyone's being honest. But what does that actually mean for students? What are they going to do?
Well, one thing is they're going to be looking more closely at applicants from certain countries or schools that have been flagged as high risk. It doesn't mean everyone from those places will be rejected, but it means they're going to check those applications more carefully.
So it's not about being unfair. It's about being careful. What can students do to make sure their application looks good?
Do your research. Don't just go with the first program you find. Look into the school's reputation, talk to students who are already there, look online for any red flags. You can even contact the school's international student office to see what kind of support they offer and how they handle things.
So be proactive, ask questions, and make sure you're making a good decision. Don't just believe the marketing stuff. Dig a little deeper.
Exactly. And, the blog post mentioned suspension certificates for some high-risk providers.
Yeah, it sounds kind of scary. What are those exactly? And what do
Ah.
students need to know?
It's actually not as bad as it sounds. Basically, if you're planning on going to a school that's been flagged as high risk, you might have to get one of these certificates before you can even apply for your visa. It just shows that the school has fixed any problems and they're meeting the requirements.
So it's kind of like a safety net for students and make sure they're not going to a school that could hurt their chances in the future.
That's right. It's just another way to make sure things are running smoothly and that students are protected.
Okay, so we've covered a lot here. Work hour restrictions,
Mm-hmm.
temporary graduate visa changes, and all that scrutiny on some student groups and schools. It's a lot to take in. But if we zoom out a little, what's the big picture here? What's causing all these changes?
Well, it's all connected, really. We're seeing countries all over the world getting more strategic about migration and population management. They're being more careful about who they let in, and they're focusing on people who fit with their needs and goals for the future.
So it's not about closing doors. It's about making sure the right people are coming in, people who can contribute and share their skills and ideas.
Exactly. It's about making sure everyone benefits, both the people coming in and the country itself. It's about making things sustainable for the long term.
So these changes are actually making the system better and more fair for the future.
That's the idea. By setting clear rules, raising the bar, and dealing with potential problems, they're making the visa process smoother and more equal for everyone.
Wow, okay. We've covered a lot in this part 2 of our deep dive. But there's one more piece of the puzzle we need to look at. How all these visa changes fit into the big global trends. Stay tuned for part 3, where we'll unpack all of that and wrap up this episode with some things for you to think about. Welcome back to our deep dive into all these visa changes. So in the last 2 parts, we've talked about a ton of stuff, like proving you're a genuine student, dealing with higher fees, and all that. But now let's step back for a minute and see how these changes are part of something much bigger.
Yeah, this is where it gets really interesting. Each country's visa rules are kind of like a clue to what's happening in the world. Big changes in population economies, even how climate change is affecting things. It's all connected.
So it's not just about filling out forms. We need to understand all these other factors that are influencing these decisions.
Exactly. Like take population growth, for example.
Hmm.
Some countries have a ton of young people, so there's like a lot of competition for jobs and resources. Other countries have a lot of older people, which brings different problems, like not enough workers and stress on social programs. And these things directly affect their immigration policies.
So a country with a lot of young people might want skilled workers who can start working right away.
Right. They might make the rules tougher and focus on certain industries where they need people. But a country with a lot of older people might be more open to young families. They might even offer them benefits to come and settle down and help balance things out.
It's amazing how these population trends shape what each country decides to do. But it's not just about how many people there are, right? It's about what skills they have, too.
Yes, you're totally right. The global job market is changing so fast. Technology, automation, globalization, it's crazy. Countries are competing to get the best talent so they can keep up.
So if you're good at stuff like artificial intelligence or data science or renewable energy, you're in a good spot. Those are the skills everyone wants.
Absolutely. Your skills are like gold. And it's not just about technical stuff either. Those soft skills are super important too. Things like being able to adapt, think critically, communicate well, and work with people from different cultures.
So it's about being well-rounded, being able to handle change, and bringing new ideas to the table.
Okay, but we can't talk about global trends without talking about climate change. It's already affecting where people are moving and forcing countries to adapt. It's a huge factor. As some places become harder to live in, with rising sea levels and crazy weather and less resources, we're going to see more and more people needing to move. Countries are just starting to figure out how to deal with all this, how to help people who've been displaced by climate change.
So it's not just about attracting skilled workers, it's also about helping people who've had to leave their homes because of climate change. It's a global problem that affects everyone.
Exactly. It's a responsibility we all share. It's going to take countries working together and finding solutions that are humane and sustainable.
Okay, so we've got population changes, a changing job market, and climate change. That's a lot. What's the one big takeaway here for our listeners?
I'd say don't be afraid of change. Don't let all this stuff overwhelm you. See it as a chance to learn to adjust and to find your place in the world. The world needs your talents, your skills, and your ideas.
Be proactive, stay
Wow.
informed, be flexible, and most importantly, be passionate about what you want to do. The world is changing, but that doesn't mean your dreams have to.
Well said. When you're getting ready to study or work abroad, remember you're not just dealing with visa stuff, you're shaping your future.
And that future is full of possibilities for people who are ready to grab them. We've given you the information, now it's your turn to make it happen. But before we go, we want to leave you with one last thing to think about. What makes you special? What can you offer that makes you stand out in the global talent pool?
What are your strengths? What makes you valuable? You might be surprised by the answer. Take some time to really think about it, figure out what you're good at, and develop those skills. The world is waiting for you.
Thanks for joining us on this deep dive. We wish you all the best.